welcome to Go Rural, Follow the Sim Road presentation. Today I'm here, my name's Kellie Britt, I'll be chairing this session. I'm super passionate about health and education in the regional, rural and remote settings, and I'm very honoured and privileged to be able to chair this session alongside some of my colleagues who work in the rural space. So we have Ms. Todd Adams, Ms. Jenny Bassett, Dr. Nisha, Dr. Arunaz Kumar, and Dr. Russell Richardson. So without further ado, we might get this show on the road, as they say. I just want to quickly hand over to Todd, though, because we are going rural and we would really like to acknowledge the lands that we're on today. So Todd, if you don't mind doing our acknowledgement, that would be terrific. Thank you.
Not a problem. Here we go. As we gather this afternoon from many locations, but come together in this virtual space, let us take a moment to reflect on the meaning of place, and in doing so, recognise the various traditional lands on which we are learning and meeting today. We acknowledge the elders, past, present and emerging, of all the lands we work and live on, and their ancestral spirits with gratitude and respect. We acknowledge members of the Aboriginal community who are participating in this event today. I acknowledge I'm coming in from Yuin country on the beautiful New South Wales South Coast.
Thanks so much, Todd. That's terrific. Well, I'm currently located on Wadawurrung land. That is my home and also where I work. And this beautiful tree that's actually on our first slide is actually located in the Yuyangs National Park, which is just outside Geelong, sitting there on Wadawurrung land. And it's just the most beautiful tree. I wish it could tell us a story or two, because I'm sure it's got plenty to share. So we have Todd Adams, as I said, Jenny Bassett, Nisha, Arunaz and Russell Richardson joining us today. And I'm just going to put these slides across slowly but surely. So please bear with us with any technology hitches that we might have along the way. I'm hoping that this will run nice and smoothly. If you have any questions or any comments that you would like to make, please type them into the chat box there, or pop them in the Q&A questions, and we'll have plenty of time at the end of the session to have a bit of a Q&A. The format this afternoon is that each of our guest speakers are going to share a story with you about their experiences in either working or teaching or providing simulations in a rural, regional or remote setting. And I really just hope you enjoy the session this afternoon. So again, a warm welcome, and we'll make a start. So first we have Todd Adams. Toddy, do you want to tell a little bit of a story about yourself and where you come from?
Yeah, thank you. My name's Todd Adams. I'm a Senior Program Manager at the Health Education and Training Institute, which is the education arm of all of New South Wales Health. It's deemed one of the pillars. So all of New South Wales Health is built across 4 pillars: excellence, clinical excellence, the Agency for Clinical Innovation, the BHI, which is the health informatics, and education, and all of New South Wales Health is built on those pillars. I am a nurse practitioner in respiratory medicine, that's my trade, and an educator, and I love going out and providing simulation opportunities for people in rural communities. So let's have a talk about...
Hang on, sorry, I've just pushed your slide across.
Oh, sorry, next slide. I think I'm supposed to say that now. I wanted to start with, always start with the why, and I suppose the premise. So the premise is that every person in New South Wales is entitled to receive the same high quality level of care, regardless of their postcode, and we can all kind of agree on that. So to receive that high quality level of care, the staff providing that care should have the same access to the same high quality level of education and educational support. Now, unfortunately, from a simulation point of view, they tend to be centred around bigger metropolitan areas, some large regional centres, and definitely at the universities. If you're in little, St Whoop Whoop somewhere, your access to simulation-based education, it can be quite limited. So we get down to the tyranny of distance. But the how. So if you look at the basic principle of simulation, and then were to put all of a simulation centre in the back of a semi-trailer and drove it around the country, providing interprofessional simulation-based education to postgraduate clinical staff and supporting clinical educators across New South Wales. What would it look like? So what we've done, we've developed a rural mobile simulation program that is more than the semi-trailer. At first, that's how it started, with the semi-trailer. What are we going to do with that? And the equipment in the mobile simulation centre. It's actually a comprehensive program managed and organised and developed and delivered by an army of two, that's myself and my colleague Kat Blake, that provides rural communities in New South Wales with simulated education with the aim of improving patient care. That's our pure goal. But how's this different to other simulation programs other than we put it in a truck and take it for a drive? The work that we do is predominantly in that postgraduate workforce space. So these are staff that are already working within New South Wales Health. So at an undergraduate level, we're kind of looking at skill acquisition, simulation's part of a formative and summative assessment, and it focuses on the development of the individual, their hard skills and soft skills, and simulation training tends to occur in particular craft groups. So it might be a group of paramedics or a group of doctors or a group of nurses. However, in the postgraduate workplace, with postgraduate learners, they're all registered health professionals. They've all met the requirements of APRA in their particular craft. Simulation's based around skill retention and maintenance, and it focuses more on the development of the team, not the individual. And we focus a lot more on the soft skills, those human factors, and the interprofessionality of that group. Thanks, Kelly. So what does it look like? Some components. Thanks, Kel. Not tough. So there's the mobile simulation centre, and you don't kind of appreciate the size of it till you stand next to it. My chest probably comes up to just above the tyres of the trailer. That's where my chest comes up to. So you don't kind of, that looks nice, but you don't acknowledge how big it is till you stand next to it and then have to climb under it and work with it. Thanks, Kel. So there's some components, next slide please, Kel, to our program. So it's not just the mobile simulation centre. We've actually got some masterclasses that we run. We run an emergency masterclass, same but different to the rest in that this is purely interprofessional, it's free, and we come to your site. There's no charge for the staff at all. We do a simulation masterclass where we provide support and education for clinical educators, but we teach them the skills of simulation. And we do a rural maternity care course. So this is a course designed for people who do not know how to deliver a baby, who are not midwives, who are not obstetricians, and that you're in a rural town with no birthing services at any point in time. Somebody's going to come in to your car park, and that might be the day you're delivering a baby. So it's about demystifying that. We work in the Mobile Sim Centre, and Kat and I, we work in partnership with the local health districts, and we tour to the groups or the clusters within the local health districts in partnership with the local educators. We provide the simulation educator, we provide the equipment and the Mobile Sim Centre if we're taking the Mobile Sim Centre, and the local health district supports us with a local health district clinical educator. That way we've got some role modelling that we can do with that educator who may be experienced or a novice simulation-based educator, and when we leave town, we're actually going to leave some knowledge behind. We've got outreach that we do via Minisim. There are some places you cannot take 6.5 metres and 28 tonnes of simulation centre. We cannot get into Tenterfield and we can't get into Crookwell. The Mobile Sim Centre was actually designed and built for Western New South Wales, nice and flat and it doesn't rain. And now we're going to drive it around New South Wales. And a lot of the coastal towns are on a cliff and they have tropical rainfall, which is a bit of a problem. So we've actually got a van that supports it, and we call that Mini Sim. So technically it's Big Sim, Mini Sim. We've got a suitcase sim model. So it's a model of simulation where equipment is packed up into a road case and on loan from us, and we send that out to the centres and then they send it back. No charge. All I want is the utilisation of that. So send me the signature sheets of the staff who came to the education that you provided with any equipment from our suitcase sim. We're a dedicated team, an army of two, and we're more than happy to travel the state We're in the process of developing a simulation framework and a set of simulation standards for all New South Wales Health statewide education that's to be delivered using a simulation methodology, so that we've got this consistent standard of simulation across the state. We've had some early attempts at virtual reality. We've done a virtual reality tour of the Mobile Simulation Centre, a little bit like the orientation to your sim centre when somebody comes in for simulation. And we've done a trial of virtual reality in our mandatory fire training. And we've got an online My Health Learning offering in the form of SimChat, which is a module for novice educators in clinical debriefing. Thanks, Kel. So some considerations that we need to make is, are we going to do simulation in situ? Is it easier for us just to cart the equipment? And that's when we take the little van. There's little sim there. That's our old little sim. We've got a new little sim now. Or do we take the mobile sim centre? Now, unless we need to take the big mobile simulation centre, we really need it. So for the emergency masterclass, we need that. We use every piece of equipment on that thing all over. So it takes us about 3-4 hours just to pack that mobile sim centre up, but to set up for a masterclass, we're looking at 8 hours, 2 people, 8 hours work to set all that up. We need to consider who is our audience. Definitely New South Wales Health staff and their clinical or non-clinical staff, but predominantly clinical. When we do work with Justice Health and Forensic Mental Health, in each correctional facility, there is a health centre and the New South Wales Health staff work in there, but they need to work with the custodial staff. So there'll be times we do a simulation with the custodial staff. And that photo in the bottom right-hand side, that's the mannequin we use for that. And we use exactly their kit that they would take to any scene on site. So he's dressed in correctional garb that the inmates would wear. You do simulation for New South Wales Ambulance as well. And that photo there on the right-hand side at the top, that was when we did a rural maternity care course at Milton Hospital, and we had some paramedic educators there. The background, that was a bushfire about 45 minutes away from the hospital and about 600, 700 metres from my home. So it was, we were watching those flames all day and the smoke all day long. So that's our audience, doctors, nurses, paramedics. Now, if there happens to be a nursing student or a medical student on placement or an allied health student on placement, and if they're part of that team and we're teaching that day, they can come on. I don't need to do undergraduate work. All of the universities have got their own sim centre. There's 2 of us and there's a lot of states, so I don't need to go into that space. Our marketing of our programs, we market that via our website, via the bush word of mouth, which goes down very well, via email, direct calls, Facebook, and all of the socials. We also direct market to the rural health networks as well. Now, the recruitment of our participants and guest faculty, we do interprofessional simulation and we use interprofessional faculty every single time so that all craft groups are covered. And when we work as interprofessional faculty, we wear the same uniform so that there doesn't appear to be any bias in any way, shape or form. We are a team and we all work together. The problem about the recruitment of our learners and guest faculty are around workforce shortages. To come to simulation, somebody has to come off the ward, somebody needs to come out into the car park if we're using the mobile simulation centre, or come to wherever we're doing it in situ, which means somebody needs to backfill that. We've had a couple of rotations through far western New South Wales cancelled because they just didn't have the staff. Normally what would happen, all of the educators from that region would go to, say, Wilcannia Hospital. They would man the ward while we looked after the staff out the back in the mobile simulation centre. So it's about their ability to be released. Commitments to general practice. We are really mindful that in rural towns, GPs are hard-working fellas and girls, and we're mindful of the waiting list for GPs. So when we do a program that's 2 days, we do a Friday and a Saturday. So we take away 1 day of GP time in their practice and 1 day of family time. And then we do actually incentivise their attendance through GP procedural grants. So we get those through ACRM or RACGP. Our CPD points, we're registered for CPD points with ACRM, not following up so much with RACGP because all of the work and the onus comes back to us, and the GPs can register their own CPD points. and with the Australian College of Nursing. Thank you. Next slide. So here I've got some photos for you of some of the things that we do. So this, the top left-hand photo, that's all of us in black, and we had a new doctor join us on that day. He's in the white shirt at the back. This is interprofessional faculty. So we've got doctors, nurses, and paramedics. We all really have fun when we're together. We all work as a team. And I would like to acknowledge the team that I work with. Kat in the top right-hand corner, on the right-hand side there, top right-hand corner, that's Kat who I work with. And that's my daughter, Molly. We drag her in at times as well. Sometimes we need the sim slave, for want of a better word, to give us a hand. You can see Ben there, Ben Taylor, and here he's showing somebody how we decompress a chest, this highly technical stuff, 5 sponges. And then you can see that's at Bowral as well, that bottom photo. That was all of the participants of a rural emergency masterclass. And you can kind of now gauge the size of that mobile sim centre when you put like 25 people in front of it. It's actually bigger than what you think. The logistics of the simulation centre are tricky, but that's not what we really focus on. Thank you.
Terrific.
Next one. I've got another one, have I?
No, that's your last slide. Thanks, Todd.
Beautiful. Thank you.
I've got one quick question for you. Who drives your big sim?
Big sim. So we've got a company that, and I call him up. I call Stuart, and Stuart either does it himself or he sends out Jim. And they do specialised haulage. So there's a lot of equipment in there. It has to be locked down. This thing folds up and goes together one way. It's like a Jenga. So you ring Stuart and he makes it get there. So Stuart did work for the U2 tour when they came out.
Oh, well, there you go. They would be hauling quite a lot of equipment. I'm sure they've got a huge band.
Trucks, yeah. And so he does other big stuff like My Kitchen Rules, and he does the work for the Rural Mobile Oral Health Centre and the chest screening stuff. So it's about getting equipment there safely. Yeah. So I'm not on a timeline. It's not line haulage. I need a clever truck driver.
I thought you might have been driving that truck around those cliff faces.
No, I can't back the trailer at the tip. No.
Well done. Thanks so much, Todd. And it was lovely to hear about all your IPL work and using your IPL faculty. And I loved your gold moment in that any student that happens to be on placement at that time, you warmly welcome them into your simulation. So congratulations, well done. All right. I'd now like to bring to the table Jenny Bassett. Thanks, Jen. Do you want to tell us a little story about yourself and how come you're in sim?
Thanks, Kelly. And I would just like to welcome you from the lands of the Yorta Yorta Nations people in the northeast of Victoria, around the Shepparton area. How I got into simulation was I started at La Trobe University about 10 years ago, and they said, do some simulation, and I thought I needed some training. And from then, it's been a wonderful snowball of simulation and training and learning and teaching, and it's just been fantastic. So my journey started at the La Trobe Rural Health School in Shepparton, and then I decided I'd like to see how some other centres do it. So I went to Rockhampton and joined the Central Queensland University, so free plug for them. And that's where I learnt my craft around the modality of mask-ed simulation. And then I returned to the Shepparton campus of La Trobe University in late 2018. So I work as a mask-ed faculty educator. I've had the great opportunity to work for a long time in the NET program as a NetSim educator. And I've really enjoyed that. Whilst I'm doing teaching, I'm also learning lots. And I had the wonderful opportunity to travel the nation. So we went to places like Katherine and Perth. And so it gave me a great national view of what was happening around simulation. And when I came back to the Shepparton area, we've joined the Hume Loddon Mallee Alliance group. So when Health Workforce Australia funding was ceased, I came back and we were looking at, well, what faculty do we still have here? We know that all the equipment is still within our area. And so I was looking to find some other stakeholders. And I was very lucky to have found Cameron Knott. And with Cameron in Bendigo, we're trying to rekindle what's happening inside of the space of the Hume Loddon Mallee region. And then just because I'd like to be doing something in my spare time, I've enrolled in a PhD, and that's around communication in preparation for practice. So that's sort of what I've been doing in the last 10 years inside of that simulation space. And so our alliance that we're building at the moment is between La Trobe, Monash and the Melbourne Rural Health School. And I've just given you a little map there to sort of show it goes from Bendigo up to Echuca, along the border to Albury-Wodonga, and then back down to sort of, I think it goes right down to Seymour, Wangaratta. So we're looking for simulation, people interested in simulation. You can come from the allied health area, medical, nursing, paramedics. You are more than welcome to join our group. And I'm sure our contact details are there for you to get in contact with us. And the group is about promoting excellence in simulation. It's about sharing our resources and our ideas, because sometimes when you're working out in the rural area on your own, it can feel very lonely. And so the faculty or everybody in the Alliance works as a prop and a support. And I'm sure, like everybody across the world in the last 2 years, we've all needed some support. So we foster simulation excellence, but the other thing we like to foster is also fun through simulation and learning. And so one of our small projects that La Trobe Rural Health School has taken on will be to revamp the SimM website, and that will be available for everybody who's a member of the Simulation Alliance. The other thing we're trying to build at the moment is to implement the interdisciplinary simulation, both in situ in hospitals and inside of the undergraduate and postgraduate spaces. But rather than have the bus, which we had during the HWA funded program, we're trying to build faculty at the home site and support them in building these programs. So we are looking forward to developing future faculty in our areas to make sure that we've got a quality program being delivered across the regions. Thanks, Kelly. Next slide. So my message today is around be creative with the modalities of simulation. You can see in that top photo, that's actually my mask ed character, and he's been working with the undergraduate students. And I blend mask ed simulation with the task trainers, because I don't want the students poking me with needles and things. So it's just about being as creative as you can across the modalities. And I think that's about being brave to do that, because I think sometimes we get siloed into a modality of simulation. So mine was around creativeness, be brave. I think it's important to have a practice run, even though you might be the only facilitator there. It's good to walk yourself through that simulation in that space. And my tip of the day was around, I used to film myself running the simulation. So I was running the debrief. I was being the student and then being the faculty, and then trying to work out how I could be the nurse assisting the students as well. And so that was around, wonderful learning opportunities so that stick in the minds of our learners. And I'm always looking for an opportunity to facilitate simulation in a different way and tweak one that's already been run. I think sometimes we get stuck on it has to be perfect. And whilst we may have designed a simulation to run that way that it is, I can attest with the beautiful first year undergraduate students, it doesn't always take the path that we would like it to take. And so sometimes we think it's a mistake, but the students don't see it that way. And so it's only the faculty that know that the students have run themselves off down a course that I could never have imagined that they could get themselves down. So I just simply then turn it into a pause and discuss and redirect the students to the direction that they need to be. And then we talk about it in the debrief with good intention. And so I think my example around debriefing was I was once in an interdisciplinary simulation. And during the simulation, we had a medical student who was looking at their iPhone. And I, for one, could not work out why he was looking at his iPhone, thinking that he was texting. But when we actually asked him in the debrief, I'm curious about why you were on your iPhone during the simulation, he was to tell us he was actually looking up the correct algorithm because he wanted to get the simulation perfect. So I think that was a good reminder for me around, you know, what the learners get out of our sessions. And the other thing is around impact. We don't know about the impact of the learning, but we'd really like it to be positive learning. And that way, so it's always keep calm. It's a simulation and nobody died today. Next slide, please, Kelly. So some of the enablers is proper preparation prevents poor performance. So if I'm going out to another site, I always get them to send me photos. And this is actually the site of the La Trobe Rural Health School in Shepparton in its formative stages. So this photo always reminds me to get a photo sent of the place that you're going to. And then it comes down to really good communication. And sometimes it's about being specific about what it is. And I think it's about being a really good listener and listening to what our stakeholders and partners are working in. So thank you for having me along, Kelly. And please, you're more than welcome to join the Hume Loddon Mallee Simulation Alliance if you live in our area.
Thanks so much, Jen. And I have to say, I loved your comment around, you know, working regional, working rurally, working remotely can be really isolating if you are a one-man band or a one-person band. And, you know, to be able to be part of an alliance, to be able to share the workload, not reinvent the wheel, perhaps share equipment and resources is just so important. And I do remember those lovely days working NetSim. That's actually where Jen and I first met many moons ago. They wanted someone, a faculty member, to go to Shepparton, and Jenny introduced me to all Shepparton has to offer, including a very nice Chinese restaurant. So thank you so much. All right, well, we'll move on to our next guest. So Nisha, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm joining you from Wurundjeri country. I am primarily a clinician, and, you know, holding a newborn baby is what gives me the most joy. So I am a Melbourne-based obstetrician, but I also work out at Bacchus Marsh, which some may say is rural, but others may say is literally skipping outside the boundaries of metropolitan Melbourne. My interest in simulation actually started with an interest in safety and quality, and a very quick recognition that actually the safety and quality around maternity services is very closely linked to education, because the only way you can provide a safe, good quality service is to make sure that all your staff are well trained and know what they're meant to do, where they're meant to do, and work together well as a team. So we'll move on to the next slide. Anybody who has worked in a rural space will recognize immediately the term urban splaining. When you pick up the phone and speak to your urban colleague and say, this is what I've got, this is what I'd like help with, and your colleague at the other end of the phone mostly doesn't, but sometimes does, give you the sort of explanation or the sort of advice that you do know yourself. That's not what you're asking. You're asking a completely different question. You're asking for help in your setting. And so that kind of sets in motion a different approach to how you would do simulation in a rural setting. How did I get started? I got started because I trained first in India, where in the 90s, where there was absolutely no simulation at all. You just dealt with emergencies one after the other, and hopefully you learned something. But if you learned, that was great. If you didn't learn, there was no mechanism of going back and looking over and saying, how can we do this better? I then moved to the UK, where the prompt maternity simulation program was just starting out. And so that got my interest. And then I moved to Melbourne, where there wasn't prompt. And so it set off this thing in motion of how can we make sure that we all do things well when we clearly have evidence to show that these things work. And then, of course, I took on a leadership role at Bacchus Marsh Hospital, and very quickly realized that rural obstetric practice is not just obstetric practice. There's a whole other component to rural practice that I had not put a lens to before that. That was how I got involved with what was the maternity simulation education program via the Royal Women's Hospital. This was a program that existed in Victoria pre-prompt. It was a program where educators from the Women's Hospital went out to small rural and regional maternity units and ran a prompt-like simulation day, a couple of days. They started out with maternity simulation, and then there was a day spent on neonatal resuscitation and simulation around that. And then, of course, Prompt arrived in Australia, and Prompt arrived in a big way in Victoria. And in fact, in the last year or a little bit over a year, the Victorian maternity insurers have specified or have said that every maternity unit must have all its staff do prompt training every year. And that would give them a rebate on their insurance. And the program is called Incentivizing Better Patient Safety. So in that space, what does a program like maternity simulation education, that is an outreach program, what role does it have? Because everybody is doing prompt. Why do they need us? So we'll move on to the next slide. That is our little van. It doesn't have a lot of equipment. It has some part trainers that we take with us. That's all right, Kellie. But why do this in a time when prompt does exist and all maternity units are doing prompt? A couple of reasons for that. One is that I'm sure all of you will know that there is an issue with sustainability of simulation programs in rural units. They often rely on the one person, that person moves on, and the whole thing can sometimes fall in a heap. And so having a way of supporting sustainability and supporting recruitment and new staff joining and getting all of the training to run a simulation program is really important, because there's nothing as bad simulation. I mean, you might as well not do simulation if you're going to do it badly. So that is one reason to have a program like this. Also, what can sometimes happen is that when you are internal, you can't see the wood for the trees, and it takes an external eye to actually identify specific issues and suggest specific solutions. Or sometimes it takes an external facilitator who doesn't have any, any kind of bias, doesn't have any issues with interpersonal conflict that exist in organizations, and doesn't have the same priorities as the organization. And so that person can then actually be that external unbiased role and can bring together the people who actually work at the coalface to suggest, to first of all bring up the issues in an open and safe environment. And then it is usually the staff who work at the coalface who have the solutions. We don't need an external provider to provide those solutions. Staff who work there know what works best and know how to make things better. But it just needs an advocate to be able to say, yes, what you're saying makes sense. How can we make this possible? Also, we know that evidence, research, guidelines, protocols all move at a very rapid pace. And sometimes that filtration down to a small rural or regional unit might not happen in a timely manner like it does in an urban space, because in an urban hospital, you have a whole quality team. There's a team that does nothing else but make sure that all your guidelines are updated with the latest evidence. That doesn't happen in a rural unit. They rely on probably one person who's a clinician who does it in their own time and can't keep up with all of this. So it helps to have somebody who can come in externally and say, actually, this has changed. How do we make this happen here? And on a broader scale, I think that having this external provider and having a space to have a discussion can foster a cultural change. And ultimately, if we foster cultural change, that is what makes a difference in any organization in the long term. Because providing a short term, let's do a PPH simulation is great. Of course, it's great. But the fact that it brings about the teamwork, brings about a place where people can openly discuss what goes well, what doesn't go well, how they can change things, how they can make things better, fosters a culture of teamwork. And I think that is really important. We'll move on to our next slide, because it's not without its challenges, and especially in rural and regional places, GPs, both obstetricians and anesthetists, provide most of the obstetric services in these units. And then making sure that they are able to attend and be part of the team is a really important component. And like Todd said, that means that we need to advocate for them to be able to apply for grants. We need to be able to provide CPD points. We need to be able to organize it in such a way that it's not taking out of their clinical time. And in COVID times, we have not been able to visit these lovely rural buildings, which I particularly really enjoy taking photographs of, because look at them, they're so grand. I mean, who wouldn't want to teach in a building like that? We have had to do this online, but it has actually still allowed space for discussion. even with those restrictions of not being able to actually go to a place, there has been a space where we can carry on with the work and with the simulation and with the education. And also, of course, technology. Now, we don't have the big van that Todd has, but there is the ability to take part trainers to the smaller places and be able to use them. From a remit point of view, we run programs for interns and students. We also run programs for professionals at various levels of experience, including ambulance staff. And we run programs, like Todd said, in places that don't have a maternity focus or don't have a birthing unit, but anybody could turn up and birth at their doorstep. And so then that provides us with the ability to tailor our program based on where we are doing it and how we are doing it. So my kind of take-home message is that whenever we do something in the space of simulation, we have to think about sustainability, and that is never more important than in the rural regional spaces, because we shouldn't have a program that relies on a few people who put their hand up, take time out of their clinical work, and are always there to do it, because when they leave, then the whole program falls apart. Instead, we need to have a way of making things sustainable. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Nisha, for sharing that. Now, I'm curious, is that Ararat, that picture?
Yes.
It is. It's the most beautiful building, isn't it? Where it's attached just to the side of their hospital there, and they've got these most amazing rooms. That's one of the privileges, isn't it, of working rurally?
Absolutely.
And I just also wanted to comment, as an end user of your program, I have Deakin medical students that were actually working out at Bacchus Marsh in the times where we didn't have simulation education and training, and they had a number of issues in their maternity unit. And the remarkable turnaround has just been a fabulous story. So well done to you and your team. That's amazing. All right, so my next guest this afternoon is Arunaz. Now, Arunaz, are you happy to tell us a little bit about your story and all about OneSim?
Thank you, Kelly. Thanks for inviting me to this wonderful session. I've been privileged to be a part of all this, these stories that we've heard from all the rural areas. I'll do a bit of introduction of myself. My name's Arunaz. I work as an obstetrician gynecology clinician, but I also have a special interest in simulation because of my education background. I work as an associate professor in Monash University, looking after medical students. And as part of that, I've started various simulation programs there. But this particular OneSim program is really close to my heart. It's, as you can see, I'm Indian in my origin, and whenever we've taken trips back to India to see family and friends and other professionals who we graduated with, have seen this change, the cultural difference that we've noticed, that how simulation can be can make such a difference, while there are places where people don't have those facilities. So for this session, I'm going to take you all the way internationally, virtually, of course, to India, and give you a snapshot of how OneSim journey began. So the OneSim program, OneSim is an acronym which stands for Obstetric and Neonatal Emergency Simulation. This program was founded by me and my husband, who's a neonatal pediatrician, Atul Malhotra. I think he's also been a part of the conference. So we thought, okay, from a background of being an obstetrician and a pediatrician, let's put together a learning package that can be of some value to where we originally come from. And while both of us teach here in Monash University for medical and midwifery students, neonatal nurses, and registrars, residents, we thought, let's take it all the way back to a rural setup in India. And that's where our journey began 6 years ago. We've been privileged to have the support of Monash University and various grants through the Royal Australasian College of Physicians that have supported, and through a lot of fundraising organizations as well that have helped us move this forward. So the program started 6 years ago. Next slide, please. And we started off from different settings. So what we would do is pack off our suitcases, and started off really informally. So there's been a long learning journey behind this as well. Essentially, we translated what we were doing here, as Nisha has already spoken to you about prom, so that makes my session a bit easy to give that maternity background. But similar to what the privileges that we have here in Australia for medical and midwifery teams, and similarly, we thought we'll take it back to India, where there are very few resources, and simulation has a different role, as many of our speakers where we've heard today, in a rural setting where those facilities are not there. For example, the top left slide that you see, right, that is a hospital called Gudalur Adivasi Hospital. The word Adivasi actually means tribal. So this is a tribal hospital run by tribal people. And these locations that I'm referring to are about at least 3 or 4 hours from the nearest, up in the hills, or sometimes remotely cut off due to floods and other natural disasters. And referral services being very scant in these areas, it's not even possible. There's no air retrieval or any other forms of retrieval. So you really have to send people away in a timely way if they needed attention. But at the same time, as we know, obstetric emergencies or any other emergencies come unannounced. So we thought there is a role for people on the ground to be taught skills that they already know, but to fine-tune those skills. And again, as we know, it's not just about clinical skills, it's about behavioral skills as well, that are key to improving practice. So you see this top right corner slide, that's me in my Indian attire, because we try to build that cultural connection while we are teaching. And the other important thing is, and also of course, language forms a major part of it. So building that connection is the most important thing. So we spend a few days at every site trying to engage with the local staff, the audience for the workshop, which is the medical and midwifery students, or the clinicians in workforce. Some of them just really healthcare workers. They form a very important part of the medical fabric there. And of course, use the local faculty. So the person you're seeing standing in the orange sari is one of their medical facilitators there. So we co-deliver those sessions with the medical and the midwifery teams there. And the bottom left slide that you see, that's the whole team in that little hospital that I'm referring to. And a beautiful, some of these, this is a beautiful little hospital, lovely little town. They really welcome the learning that they get. And many of these places have actually used that as a way to anchor their learning for future as well. So that sustainability element that Nisha talks about, we've managed to establish it in many of these locations. On the bottom right slide, that's Atul, my husband, and a neonatal pediatrician who is teaching neonatal resuscitation to the medical and nursing staff. So these are the skills that we mentioned on the left, normal labor, that we start off really easily and then go on to more complex things like shoulder dystocia, neonatal resus, etc. Next slide, please. Then this is the simulation equipment. It actually gets neatly packed off in a couple of suitcases and checked in, and eventually it rolls out into the simulation circuit. So because we are looking after a lot of participants at one time, it's usually helpful to set up multiple sessions running simultaneously. So we use the local faculty and their expertise, because the aim is not to radically change practice or anything, but just to make those tiny improvements in behavioral skills or offer those suggestions that could help them continue. On the right, you see that publication, again, in remote and regional South India. This is an open access journal, Advances in Simulation, so please feel free to access it. Next slide, please. And this is where the online journey continues. So unfortunately, when COVID-19 hit, all our travel stopped and we had to move this to an online version. And we did this through Zoom platform. So there's a pre-brief through with the online facilitator. So the simulations is actually run from a sim center in Melbourne, but then you can see it being broadcasted here with a camera and attached to a gimbal for stabilization. And that's me playing the mum. And that's Nisha, actually, who's also a part of our OneSim team. And so the team's grown to a reasonably big team across the country now in Australia. And we have lots of volunteers who have helped us. And so what we do is we run a sort of a hybrid simulation. So I'm playing the role of the mum and acting as the mum while the baby is being born. And all this is broadcasted live. We again maintain that co-delivering with the local staff. So the debriefing is where the real learning happens, and trigger questions help us discuss what the interaction between small professional groups is like. So essentially you learn by observation. So we are sort of role modeling and sometimes deliberately making mistakes. So those can be picked up. So role modeling practice of obstetric gynecology, obstetric simulation and neonatal scenarios. Next slide, please. And so what we've learned is that we can adapt to an online version. Again, we are still connected even though we are distant, and online is a form of learning where we learn from observation. However, hands-on learning cannot be underrated, and possibly moving forward, this is going to be an adjunct to learning. So online and hands-on can work together, and that's probably the space that I'll be working towards moving forward. We've had a few publications on our online learning as well. This is in Journal of Interprofessional Care and a few more coming up. Next slide, please. And just to give us a brief idea on who we are, please check us out on onesimeducation.com. As I said, Nisha and a few others are a part of the team, which is ever expanding. So feel free to join us or offer your comments and feedback. We'll be more than happy. We are very keen to grow this organization, which is also now running in many other countries, which I didn't refer here, but in Africa, Malawi, we have an ongoing course, and various places in Australia as well. So the program is growing, so we would love your feedback and interest. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arunaz, and a big shout out to all the team that from OneSim. I think this is just an amazing take on what we do here locally that can actually be translated everywhere around the world. So well done to you and your team. And I love your sim in a suitcase. I think that's great. All right, so our last guest speaker this afternoon is Russell Richardson. Now, Russell, you've probably got lots to say about your winter wonderland where you work, but also a little bit about you and your history too.
Thanks, Kelly, and hello, everyone. Russell's my name, and I'm a rural generalist. I guess I consider myself, like an olden days doctor, because I still do general practice, but also obstetrics, emergency stuff, take my own x-ray pictures when necessary. And for over 20 years now, I've done lots of simulation work in various roles. I've worked for ACRM, mainly doing REST courses and so it's rural emergency skills training, REOT courses, which is very similar to what the other presenters do relating to obstetrics for non-obstetricians. But I've been an instructor and participant on the prompt courses. And as you said, Kel, one of my jobs is to work in the snow fields. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment and the simulation we do there. But I guess I thought I'd start off and just talk about a few of the key things I think that are important with simulation. And one of them is, you do need to make it a fun, safe learning environment. And we need to remember that a lot of the participants actually are required to successfully pass the courses that we do in order to be credentialed in their roles working as rural doctors or nurses. So I'm mindful of that, and I think our roles as facilitators of their learning is to try to help them through that course. And I've been fortunate enough to work with Kellie doing the REST courses as a lead instructor, and I'm sure she would agree that sometimes it can be quite challenging to get people through, but a lot of the time it's actually driven by their performance anxiety, and they may feel uncomfortable, being tested in that environment. Obviously, you want to try to make it as realistic as possible, and as you've seen today through the other speakers, there's some pretty remarkable simulation equipment out there. Ideally, you're better to be practicing with the team that you work with, and that's where one of the strengths, I think, of the prompt course that I teach on is that you do it with the people that you work with in your own environment and using the gear in your own department. So hopefully you'll find some things that you might want to change in terms of protocols or where things are. I think the consistent message that we get as feedback as lead instructors is that most of the participants want more hands-on skill stations and scenarios and less didactic lectures and talking. And most of the courses I do, there's some pre-learning, which we have to presume that they've actually done. So that saves us having to do didactic lectures as part of it. And preparation and planning, I think, is key. And even though I've done many, many courses, every time for 2 or 3 days beforehand, I just run over in my mind the new lectures, skill stations and scenarios that I'm responsible for. And even on the day, make sure that you've got all the equipment that you need, because there's nothing more frustrating than turning up to do a skill station and finding you're missing a piece of essential equipment. So there's only one person who can be responsible for that, and that is you, even if you've got helpers that sort of are setting up the stations for you. And also, if you've got complex scenario gear, in particular things that require interconnectivity or IT, they always go wrong. So make sure that they're working before you start. And because I'm pretty hopeless with that sort of stuff, I make double efforts, particularly for things like, the defibrillation stations where you're using iSIMs and stuff like that. Often they don't work when you want them to. So Kel, we'll move on to the next slide, please. So as you mentioned, I live some of my working life up at Mount Hotham Ski Resort. I've worked up there for 30 years, and these slides sort of show the environment that often faces us. And you can guarantee when you need to actually put into action some of the stuff you've been practicing in simulation, it's going to be a miserable day with a blizzard, and you can't get on or off the mountain. So you need to be confident that the team that you work with understand and trust you. So move on to the next one, please, Kel. So here's some slides sort of showing some of the simulations we do up there. And we normally do at least 2 simulations a year, one in the beginning of the season, one in the end, and try to vary them around and do different things. A few of us get our heads together and make them as realistic as possible, but certainly challenging. So here's some ski patrollers who are pulling a person who's gone down a steep cliff with injuries out of that area, and it needs to involve all of the agencies that you would work with. So at Mount Hotham, we're a team of people with a medical centre, ski patrol, the lift company who controls the lift, ambulance and police. And part of this, I suppose, helps to make sure that you work as a team rather than one person puffing out their chest and saying that they're the only one that needs to be listened to. We're lucky up at Mount Hotham that everybody's prepared to work with each other to get a good outcome. So move on to the next slide, please, Kel. So these are actually real life scenarios. The slide on the left involves a person who's actually come down a steep slope and was unconscious, found in a creek at the bottom of one of the ski runs. And the fella in the blue helmet is one of the doctors that works in the clinic with us. There's ski patrol there, and So doing simulations of how we might consider getting people out of this situation can be helpful. The one on the right, actually, that's me in the green jacket there. The fella in blue has been winched out of a helicopter. He's a paramedic, and the guy in the black is the guy who runs all the chairlifts and operations. And so whenever we have a serious sort of incident, everybody sort of helps each other and turns up and helps out and see what their service can do to make sure we get a positive outcome. So this fella here had broken his pelvis and his leg was ultimately winched out with a helicopter. But you need to have thought through the process of how you're going to manage that, and the best way to do that is through simulation. Next one, please, Kel. And this one here is simulating getting somebody in the orange thing on the back of the chairlift is a person who's been injured. They travel up on the chairlift, and what happens if the chairlift breaks or doesn't work or can't be used? We have to simulate actually getting up there with winches and getting that person safely off there. So we do a lot of this sort of stuff. It's good fun, but looks like it was a beautiful day that day. But when things like this really happen, it's always snowing and you can't see a thing, and it's much more challenging. Next one, please, Kel. So these are actually training the registrars, because what we do up at Mount Hotham is quite unique in terms of managing people. We're a long way from help, and so we have registrars that work up there with us, and we need to make sure that they understand that, and we give them best training we can before they start their placement with us. But one of the reasons why I used this particular slide on the right is that person there is one of the GP registrars, and I think it's good to actually put the equipment onto people, like neck braces, or in this case a Donway splint for a fractured femur, and so you can actually feel what it's like to wear this thing, because you're proposing that you're going to be sending somebody for hours, you know, to a tertiary care centre with something like this on, so it helps you have better understanding of making it comfortable for them. So next one, please, Kel. So I think that simulation has a lot of strength if you've actually got relevance and authenticity with it. These people in the slide are colleagues of mine that are doctors that have had a lot of rural experience. And as I said to you before, I teach on a number of different courses. The first three, the REST, ALS and REOT, are run by Akram, but they have very, very similar bases, I think, to some of the other presenters today. The prompt we've talked about briefly, which is obstetric training in your own hospital situation. Alpine skills relates to what we do up at Mount Hotham. And I work now in Mount Barker Emergency, and at least once a month, we get together and do simulation training, because a lot of the stuff that we do in simulation training, we rarely have to do in person, and it can be really good to just reinforce those protocols in your head, and so hopefully they'll come to you naturally when the real life situation occurs. Next slide, please, Kel. So the other thing that I don't think any of the other presenters have mentioned is, I think it's important if you're running simulation courses to think of the instructor skill set. And I don't think it needs to be the most experienced or the most knowledgeable person, because in order to be a really good facilitator, you need to have certain skills to be able to help with your candidates' learning. So you certainly need to have some experience in the field, and so that people can feel confident that you know what you're talking about. But you need to have strong interpersonal skills. In particular, be good at actually giving feedback to people, and that might mean to the candidates themselves, or being prepared to share feedback amongst your instructed colleagues. Obviously, having a teaching background and passion is important as well, and you need to be good at time management. So I think that's it for me, Kel. So I think it's open now to questions, isn't it?
Terrific. Thanks so much, Russell. And I have to say, you know, I think your slide beforehand about making it really relevant and purposeful, you know, to have that teaching is really valuable for the learners in the space. And I think what I've taken away from listening to all of you is that interprofessional learning is really important. The ability to be perhaps resourceful is really important. You don't necessarily need to have all the machines that go ping, simulation in a suitcase. On the rest courses, which Russell and I both teach on, we have a table of gear where people can, pretend and simulate, and it's not high fidelity stuff. It's low fidelity, but if you can immerse learners in that space, they get the best out of it. So I think that's really important. So some of the comments that have come up, there's been no actual questions themselves, but a comment or a question that I would pose to the panel would be, if you were to have you were given an opportunity to provide a simulation piece somewhere rurally, what might your hot tip might be? What would be your top tip? Todd?
The scenario has to have real fidelity, and you can use low sin tech equipment, doesn't have to be high, but the story itself has to be credible. It has to be localized to the region, and it has to be believable. Yeah. With our workforce that we work with, these are postgraduates, and they got really finely tuned meters about what's real and what's not real. The problem with having it really close to clinical practice, you just need to be mindful that something catastrophic hasn't happened at that site just prior to you coming to do that simulation. So you might do the quad bike accident, and country towns are small. Everyone's known somebody in a quad bike accident. Everyone's known somebody from a horse fall, an industrial accident, farm machinery. We just need to know what the current landscape is. So make your simulation really close to practice, but not too close that you're going to hurt somebody. That's a problem. And the fidelity of it has to be just right. If the natural transition of it goes like that, beautiful. But sometimes you see simulations and the transition from one space to another, it's just not realistic. And they'll read through that in a heartbeat.
And I think if you don't have that, that fidelity contract or that fictional contract, you do lose. Candidates don't get bang for their buck if they're not invested in it. And I think, as you say, setting up a good backstory is really important. I think also framing your briefing of your learners when you're coming into that space, because sometimes we don't have all that information. You made a really valid point that, rural town, horsing accident or a quad bike accident, you might not have that information at your fingertips. So perhaps setting it up early in the piece that the intention today is about learning. However, there may be a possibility that a trigger might be released in some previous experience or some situational issue that you've been, whether it's affected you personally or professionally, and know that there is support in that space. People can step away if need be. And that's happened quite a few times when we do the rest courses, because on a rest course, we do adults and pediatric scenarios, both medical and surgical, and we deliver over 20 scenarios across a weekend. So there's normally someone that has been affected or impacted by one of those scenario stems in some way, shape or form. So creating that safe working and learning environment is really important. Thanks for sharing, Todd. Nisha, what would be your top tip?
I think it's really important to know who you are providing the simulation for and what the point of the simulation is. Because if your audience is looking for skills development, then that is not a simulation. That's a skills development kind of thing that you want to do. Whereas if they're looking for teamwork, communication skills, those sorts of things, then it is simulation that will work. So it's very important to tailor what you're doing to your learners.
Yeah. That's a really, really good point. And I think sometimes our programs, we can think about how we actually scaffold our learners. So if we are doing, 3 top scenarios that are really part of their workplace, or perhaps they have had a critical event that has never taken place in that space before, to perhaps, scaffold them perhaps with some of those clinical skills sessions, so that when they do get to scenario, they actually perform really, really well, because they actually have that knowledge of how it's all come to fruition, I suppose, what I'm trying to say. Thanks, Nisha. Jenny.
My top tip for the day would be use some quality frameworks, and I use the Inaxel ones. I think they have a lovely broad range. There's plenty out there available worldwide, but I'm in Inaxel, and I think it's important if we can pin our practice as faculty and in training people to quality frameworks, I think it helps us to deliver a quality program, whichever setting and to whomever you might be delivering your program to. So, and it gives you some reassurance when you've got to write the report to those who need reports, that, you know, there's quality frameworks inside of what we do around evidence-based practice.
And I think you've just taken the words right out of my mouth. Evidence-based practice. It's so important that we have that to underpin our practice, our teaching delivery, our assessment delivery. Russell, you made a point about using simulation and assessment as well. You know, our whole programs, they need to be robust, and we need to have our own integrity so that is, you know, can't be questioned in that way. Thanks, Jen, for sharing that. And you're right, and AXL frameworks are obviously available to a number of people. If you put them out on the net, we can put a resource up for you. And Todd made mention earlier on that she's in the process of creating some new standards or revised standards, but standards that perhaps, you know, the rest of Australasia might be able to use, because I think that sometimes is a challenge in rural and regional spaces because different territories and states do different things. So it'd be nice to have a unified set of standards or a unified set of guidelines that we can all tap into and work to. So then we are familiar no matter where we work or where we live and play. Arunaz, your hot tip.
I'd probably speak up from my international experience. I think that building that cultural connection with the learners is really important. We focus a lot when we teach on building that, making that intellectual connection, but we undermine a lot of times what that cultural, being on the same page, what it can do to the learning. So I think, especially, I mean, here, I think my talk was about from an Indian setting. So I would say, you know, whether it was about having the same language, and if we don't, then using that co-facilitating with the local, you know, network is so important. So we can bridge those connections. Otherwise, a lot of times we might be giving a lot of information or even suggestions which may not be heard by the learners, or even if they do like your suggestions, it's very it's not applicable to their practice. So that context-based learning and coming to this on the same page culturally, I think is the most important thing from my perspective.
And I think that's probably something that we haven't done very well in the past is, you know, adding that cultural layer to what we actually teach and how we deliver it. I think that's really quite remarkable what you've brought to the table this afternoon. And I loved it that, you know, you wore your Indian dress when you were actually teaching in that setting to try and build that relationship and to be part of that team. I think that was really, really powerful. But so thanks for sharing. Russell, what would your hot tip be?
I think one of the things that I've learned, which is very important in simulation and teaching generally, is getting better at giving feedback to people. I can remember early in my rural doctor career, there was essentially only one simulation course that you could do. There was one called the EMST course, which was run by a bunch of surgeons. And I remember thinking at the time, you know, they were helping us to learn through humiliation. And I really sort of struggled with that. And so when I became a teacher and an instructor, I wanted to improve my ability to give feedback to people in a safe and useful way. In the REST course, we use a thing called Pendleton's rules, which I think is a good starting point. There's lots of different models out there. But the basis of the Pendleton rules, for those that haven't done that before, is at the end of, you know, your scenario, whatever you're teaching, you make sure you clarify points of fact, you know, is the person who was the candidate on the same page as the instructor and the other people who've been observing. But more importantly, sort of ask them about what they did well. And obviously a lot of people, when you ask them to critique themselves, they often go straight to the things that they didn't do well. And it can be really helpful. You can always find something that they did well, even if it was a train wreck. And that means that they'll often go away feeling, you know, that they can do things better but they weren't just absolutely hopeless. So I think that's one of the things I learned. I've tried to get better at giving feedback, and I think that if you're going to become a teacher of any type, that's a really important thing that you need to learn.
I think there's a real art to debriefing and providing feedback, and knowing what the difference is in that space, and you know, having those different tools that we can link into. So I think that's a really, really valuable comment. I'm looking at the time. We are literally nearly out of time. It's just clicked over to 2:10. So in my last 120 seconds, I'd like to say a very, very big thank you to our rural panel. It's been so lovely to have a voice in the rural setting. We've been asking for this at Sim Congress for a long, long time. So I'm glad that it's finally come to the table, and that we've had some great stories and great people to share those stories. I really hope that you know, you'll continue to do fantastic things in your spaces and in your work with your colleagues, and that you'll continue to share it with the ASH community and the Australian Simulation Congress community at large. So keep the conversations going. Go rural, work rural if you can. You don't know what you're missing out on, and all the best. Stay safe and good luck.
Thanks, Gil.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.